All right, we're back with one of my all-time favorites. We're back with another classic album review. This is an album that I really got into during my second wave of progressive rock after I had dove in deep into the classics of Yes, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and King Crimson, and I was hungry for more. And in around this time was when I was doing my own self-discovery. So this was one that really solidified my love for progressive rock music and my knowledge that there was still amazing progressive rock music being recorded in that time period. So let's dive into this one. Long before Dark Matter by IQ. So IQ is a neo-progressive rock band from the United Kingdom. They were one of the first on the scene in terms of a neo-progressive rock style. Them and Marillion were kind of the first two to continue that progressive torch in the 80s and almost like kickstarted the neo-progressive rock. And they came on in 1983 with Tales from the Lush Attic. They followed that up in 1985 with The Wake and kind of hit and miss success with that. It honestly wasn't until the 90s with Ever in 1993 that I feel like they really found themselves. They really put something out that distinguished them outside of being another Marillion, even though they were kind of on the scene at the same time. From there, they put out Subterranea in 97, and then The Seventh House in 2000. And then we come to my favorite item from them, which is Dark Matter. So spoiler alert, this is my favorite album from them, and this is honestly, IQ is my favorite neo-progressive rock band. I love them. I think they're just underappreciated. Like they're really loved in the neo-prog sphere, but I feel like they're underappreciated in the progressive rock sphere overall. They have come out, and I mean, people seem to love their next couple of albums. I still love Frequency, the album that came out after this one. I wasn't a big fan of Road of Bones, which still to this day is a lot of people's favorite one. It's one of my least favorite ones. And then they came out with The Resistance a couple of years ago. The one thing that I love about this particular album, there's a number of facets of it that I really love, but the main thing is the interplay between Mike Holmes on the electric guitar and the guitar works, as well as Martin Orford on the keyboards and synthesizers. I feel like these two are masters of their crafts at this point, and they took what they learned from The Seventh House, especially from tracks such as the title track of The Seventh House, as well as The Guiding Light. I feel like they took what they learned from those two pieces and applied it very heavily here. And the other is, of course, Peter Nichols on the lead and backing vocals. His vocal works just shine on here. And I also love his lyrical content and the lyrics that he presents on here. They're very thought-provoking, even though half the time they don't really follow too much of a narrative flow. Like that is one of his challenges, especially on his big concept albums such as Subterranea, where you're like, okay, I know that there's an overarching story, but what does it really mean? Even though the actual poetry of the lyrics are very potent and very tangible, I still really enjoy that aspect of his playing styles. Now, rounding us all off, we have John Jowett on bass, and he's been with the band for a number of years up in this point. The only thing that I still feel is, again, if I have to nitpick, the only thing that I feel needs a little bit of work is Paul Cook on the drums, and this is his last album with the band, as he was replaced by Andy Edwards on the subsequent album of Frequency. And I think they've had a couple even change-ups since then. But I feel like Cook's drumming style, it provides a great grounding and a great rhythm section, but I feel like with the top notch of all the other players, I do feel like he's playing catch up half the time, and there's a few moments on these tracks that I feel like he's trying to add his own personality or add a little bit of flair, and it just doesn't quite land as well. Now, of course, this is me nitpicking. This is me actively looking for flaws of this overall masterpiece, and it's only because the elevation of everybody else that I'm noticing that there's somebody trailing just a hair behind. So let's talk about the overall tracks on here. Let's talk about the overall items that we have on here. The album starts off with Sacred Sound, one of the best tracks written by IQ. I think they really opened it up with a really meaty banger, even though they do steal a lot of their own material, such as like Awake and Nervous, especially within that rhythm style, that dun 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 dun. Like it's the exact same rhythm style, and so I can't necessarily knock them against that. And they also steal a little bit of the jamming sessions that's found on their previous work from Ever of Leap of Faith, when Martin and Mike are playing off one another. I feel like they kind of retread a little bit of already treaded ground. And again, I know I'm nitpicking, but those are just some of my thoughts. I mean, the overall track itself is still brilliant. I love how it opens up with this really meaty synthesizer that's almost like an organ and this really grand sound. We have that really dark foundation with these very bright accents. So you have this really beefy bass bottom. That's fun. Beefy bass bottom, paired with this very heavenly, otherworldly soundscapes that kind of overlay it. I love that they go off in this massive jam session that's just dripping with brilliance in that sense. Again, hats off to Mike and Martin in their playing styles in that sense. From there, we come into Red Dust Shadow, and for me, when I first listened to this back in like 2006, I think was when I discovered this album, I was in peak angst Michael, right? Like I was dripping in angst, like, I'm a suburban white boy, so I have all these problems, you know? So listening to Red Dust Shadow and how it builds, because it starts off very soft, very somber, very intimate, and it slowly builds itself up into this extreme melodramatic outpour of emotion that creates this massive crescendo by the end point. Only the emo side of me that was listening to a lot of like My Chemical Romance could really appreciate the brilliance of this. Now I'm kind of listening to it with the lyrical content being like, is that a little much? But I can still appreciate the overarching ideas and emotional outpour that this track has. From there, we come into the two, I would say, less than stellar, but still very, very fun tracks of You Never Will and Born Brilliant. And this is one of the tracks where I feel like Cook's drumming style isn't quite where the band wants to be, especially when we get into the chorus section where he has that little off-tempo flair, and I feel like it just drags just a hair of a second too much. And I feel like if somebody were to add a little bit more flares to that, or a little bit more of a gusto, I think we would have had something really, really special on our hands. And otherwise, it does stick out a little bit with a sore thumb, and I'm like, I don't know if it really landed as much as I really wanted it to. But what really saves this track, outside of the masterful singing styles from Peter and the really tasty guitar work, is Martin's solo on the end piece, where it comes into this really tasty synth keyboard flair, like almost harkening back to like a Rick Wakeman style. I love the flourishes and I love the solo where it's like he's like firing off a note a second, and it's just, well, even more so, like 5 or 6 notes per second. Really, really fantastic in that sense. And again, this is where it shows that even these weaker tracks, in comparison to the overall album, is a brilliant, brilliant expression of music. From there, we go into Born Brilliant, and I do feel like it's a little bit of a Welcome to the Machine ripoff from Pink Floyd, especially how it opens up in this opening up of a cavern and the slow synthetic soundscapes that we have on Peter's vocal work. The one thing that I do love, though, is that bassy bottom that we have on this. That boom, 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 boom. Like, it's so tasty, it's so tangible, it's so gnarly, and I really do enjoy that, like, just rockin' rhythm section that we have on this one. Mike's guitar work on this is fine, and I do love the fact that he's able to kind of test the waters in terms of like this more soaring, ethereal playing styles rather than like this massive noodly thing. It works pretty well, but again, what really brings me back to this track is that bass. That's such a chugging bass. So from there, we come into the last track. This album's only 5 tracks long, and it's the big one. It's Harvest of Souls, the big 24-minute track. And in one hand, it is essentially a Supper's Ready ripoff from Genesis. I will be the first to admit that. But on the other hand, I love where this song goes. This really rekindled my love of progressive rock music, because this is the epitome of the like 20 plus minute track for me. Like, this is the standard. This is the gold standard of where I want people to be. We have this, again, it opens up just like many Genesis tracks, specifically Supper's Ready, but also the musical box with that plane of overlays of acoustic guitars playing up and layered on top of one another. And then we go into this really beautiful kind of soundscapes that set the stage of this track. And then we come into the main theme that will be reprised at the end, a la Supper's Ready. And where we go within this track is so brilliant and beautiful. I love all the kind of stops and starts that we have on this. And it's less of a jerking head styles, but more of a passing of the baton. And really, I love each transition. I love how each transition builds upon one another. Each big one is from an explosion that left us from the last one, and each kind of die out from the last is more of like an able to catch our breath, examine the landscapes that are around us, take stock, and then charge on ahead. This is one of the top 5 big epics for me. Like if I had to sit down and take only 5 big epics to a desert island, this is top of my list what I would choose. And it ends the album off brilliantly. I love this track more than I can express, and that's all I really have to say. If you haven't already heard this track, it's just brilliant, even though it is a Supper's Ready clone. So in the end, Dark Matter from IQ really did solidify my love for the band, and it made me go back and appreciate all of their other albums. I love how each track has its own star performer on it. I love how each track has me wanting something and makes me look forward to it. There's no dip or dive in this album. Everything from the start to the finish is just a brilliant string of music, and the only issues that I have with this album that I've pointed out are more nitpicks than anything else. I do want to be upfront and honest with you guys. This album is as close to perfect as I've heard from IQ, and it really is a perfect album in that sense. So it goes without saying that Dark Matter from IQ is an absolute masterpiece.
We're not worthy! We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
And that's what I got for Dark Matter from IQ. What did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Where do you think it lands in the overall discography of IQ? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting down below. And if you like what you see and you want to help support me, consider donating to my Patreon. I've left that link down below. You'll get your name at the end credits, as well as shoutouts on all of my podcasts, as well as my live streams, which I hope to start up really, really soon. And that's what I've got. That's all I've got. So thank you so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.